Hello and welcome to episode 334 of the Crate and Crowbar PC gaming podcast, recorded on the 29th of July 2020. I'm Marsh Davis and I'm joined this evening by Graham Smith.
Hello.
And Tom Senior.
Hello. Good day.
Hello. There's been some news this week, hasn't there? There was the Xbox Games Showcase from the end of last week, which was all right, wasn't it? Mixed feelings in the discourse about some of the things that were shown. I thought Halo looked bloody nice, but I appear to be one of the only people.
Yeah. I'm not a big Halo guy. I never have been. I thought it looked okay. I thought it was going for a particular art style and delivering on that art style well. And that's where I kind of differ from a lot of the people criticizing it, who just seem to think, well, there's not that many polygons on screen. I expect billions of polygons from a flagship new console game, and they just seem to be cross about pure graphical reasons rather than actual artistic intent reasons.
Yeah, I mean, this was I felt was kind of discombobulating about it because maybe I'm just out of step with what other people expected from Halo 1. Oh, sorry, Halo 1? Halo
That's
Infinite.
a Freudian slip right there.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily expect Halo to be the game which showcases next-gen graphics, particularly. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that motivates me anyway, really. I'm just more interested in, like you say, having a good art style. I know, obviously, yeah, like Tom says, it's a Freudian slip because it was obviously really trying to recapture the feeling of Halo 1 and 2. And so, in a sense, it was intentionally retreading old ground in its environment. So I'm sure there'll be stuff later in the game which is less like Halo 1, but they were just making this point with the trailer, which I think is a sensible point to make, given that the recent Halo games, which are more divergent from that aesthetic, haven't really captured the imagination in the same way that the first few installments did.
Yeah, and they've been open all along. Like they said a couple of years ago that Halo Infinite was going to be... They didn't use the phrase spiritual reboot like they used at the event itself, which is a terrible phrase, but they said it was going to be revisiting Halo 1 and 2 and the environments from that game and the style from that game, and kind of giving it, we're trying to create something that had that same feel. And I love the art director of the game is a guy, who I first stumbled across his work in 2001 when he ran a Quake 3 mapping competition called GeoComp 2, which was about creating these beautiful maps using just polygons and brushes, not textures or lighting or anything like that. And he created work for it that was sculptural in its beauty, and then turned out to be this incredible concept artist as well. And if you compare Halo Infinite to his concept art, you can see directly how they are actually just creating the way he paints trees, for example, in the game. And I like it for that reason. I don't need super photorealistic trees. And the other thing is that's not how Xbox are trying to sell this console. The thing that they said about Halo Infinite is that it's a quote 10-year platform. There's not going to be Halo Infinite 2 years down the line. There's not going to be a Halo 6. They're just going to continually update Halo Infinite. And it's a thing to get you to subscribe to Game Pass, because you're just going to get a drip feed of Halo content for the next 10 years if you do so. So that's the console that they're trying to get you to buy, basically, as a Game Pass account.
Yeah, I don't know why people would want Halo to look super realistic. To kind of push the envelope of graphics to make that kind of level of heightened realism. I mean, Halo is a sort of game about shooting pink crystals at little space goblins and jumping over them and then blowing them up with a giant fizzing purple grenade. It's not... I don't know what people wanted from it that wasn't this in a way. I feel like there's been this sort of... I think this is really... I think the whole debate about this is really interesting because it highlights a problem, I think, with the way that game development has sort of created this incrementalism of detail. It's like you move up from textures that are 256 by 256 to 512 by 512, and to sort of prove that you've done this, you have to add more detail to that texture, like more scratches and more rivets and more ridges to the armor. And this happens again and again and again. And you sort of get stuck in this sort of gravity well of detail instead of design. And you can see that like across like all games, but you can see it specifically in the drift across the last few Halo games, where Master Chief gets just sort of increasingly noisy, and his armor gets grayer and grayer and more detailed, and further away from this sort of like the kind of polygonal simplicity, which might have been restricted by the technology at the time, but was nonetheless sort of like had these kind of simplistic forms which are kind of could still be aspirational. And this game sort of presses the reset button on all of that drift and says, okay, well, what if we were making a direct translation from those original designs to the technology of now? And the technology of now is so sophisticated that it doesn't need to prove that it's detailed, or at least I don't think it should. Then you can have like you can have a nice matte plastic surface, and it can be a valid aesthetic choice and not a sign that you just ran out of texture budget, you know?
Yeah.
You see that, I think, in a lot of there's these really gorgeous material choices that the concept artists have made in Halo Infinite, and the shapes that they use for the armor, both of Master Chief and also on his weapons and the enemies, and the big monkey men, the brutes, have this really chunky plastic quality to their armor, which has the sort of form factor of like samurai plate armor. But it also looks like it's some kind of futuristic ceramic plastic blend which has like just this solidity of Duplo. There's this kind of really kind of chunky quality to it, and all of that stuff is there, and that's underpinned by sophisticated technology. You know, that's underpinned by incredibly detailed normal maps and other kinds of maps that are overlaid onto albedo textures. And like all of that's in the demo if you look for it, but people were complaining that it looked flat, and I think that comes. I mean, it's been analysed in great depth, but like it's just mostly being played in the shade. That might have been a mistake from the perspective of how they set up that demo to showcase the graphics. But I mean, it's mostly because it's just, you know, they're playing in the half light, so you're not going to get that kind of striking contrast as the sun strikes the edge of the gun. But as soon as you do get into the light, you can see all these kind of lovely suggestions of volume and specularity that's going on, and it's still quite sophisticated. And I'm sure there are corners, you know, being cut on the global illumination that's used in the show because they have to ship this game across multiple incredibly different platforms. But the counter side to that is there is some suggestion from the demo that the sunlight itself is going to be a dynamic light and day cycle, which, I mean, given the sort of celestial grandeur that of the Halo itself and the setting, seems like that might play quite a significant role visually and also, I don't know, maybe not mechanically, but
But that's the sort of thing that I'm more interested in from a next-gen Halo, because Halo was most exciting to me in that very first trailer, before Microsoft even bought Bungie and turned it into an Xbox exclusive, when it was going to be a Mac game. They did that 9-minute long E3 trailer, which follows regular military grunts moving across the Halo surface, riding in the Jeep with the lovely physics, driving past like a river where animals are drinking and herding and running along beside it. Like, it was almost like No Man's Sky. It was almost like No Man's Sky first trailer of like, oh wow, this is a real flowing world. And Master Chief only comes in at the very end, and it built up this sort of a mystique and an atmosphere that I don't think the full game fully paid off, because it was obviously not as open as that trailer suggested. But there was something of that grandeur and the systemic implied scale of it that I always really like. That was the fantasy to me. It wasn't about being a dude with a motorbike helmet on, killing grunts. And like, that bit of it just in the trailer looks like, well, this just looks kind of like Doom or Rage 2 to me. I feel like this is just a colourful action game where you're looping about with a grappling hook, shooting things, and the guns seem quite nice. But I've played that game many times. That game continues to get made by many companies every single year. But I know there was another game at the Xbox event that I thought had a similar thing, which was Stalker 2, which is like incredibly exciting that they're making a new Stalker game. But what they showed was a CG trailer going, hey, look, it's the Ferris wheel in Chernobyl and it's all ruined and stuff. You remember burnt out cars and dilapidated buildings, right? And like, presumably that's because that game doesn't actually exist yet. But that's also like, that's not the fantasy of Stalker. The fantasy of Stalker for me was its crazy A-life systems that we touched on last week, where it's got this kind of ecosystem of animals and creatures and other stalkers moving around the zone, and the interplay of that and how that produces kind of dynamic results for the player.
Yeah, it's hard to know who is actually making that Stalker, because I know there were some weirdnesses with the name, and it got passed around various different people, and people who were the actual original developers of Stalker, or at least some group of them, seemed to be making something which was Stalker related, but then I don't know if the license ended up with them.
I think it was a multiplayer game, right? Like it was. I think a bunch of the devs broke off to make a kind of multiplayer shooter, which had anomalies and a lot of the kind of Stalker stuff in it, but it wasn't actually like Stalker branded, if you know what I mean.
Was that Severium?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So Stalker 2 is being made by a company with the name GSC Game World, who were the developers of the original game. How many of the original developers are actually involved? I don't know. Because like it was weird the way it shut down originally. Yeah, it's all kind of a mess. So I don't know who they really are, whether it's someone that just bought the rights to the company name and is wearing its skin.
What were the other games from the Xbox showcase that caught your eye?
Let's have a look. So we've got Forza Motorsport. That's a classic, sort of like Microsoft standby, isn't it?
The boring Forza.
yeah, right. Horizon is so much better, but so we'll get one of those. We've also got an RPG from Obsidian that looks a lot like Skyrim, called Avowed. And for me, this was one of the most interesting reveals, in the sense that Obsidian are constantly trying to drink Bethesda's milkshake, and this is sort of the latest iteration of that business strategy. So it's a very kind of vague trailer. We don't know much about the game at all. It's set in the world of Pillars of Eternity, which is a good world, but it is a kind of first-person, dual-wielding RPG Skyrim style. And yeah, it feels like their sort of like attempts to, sort of like plant their flag on the Skyrim planets. What am I talking about? Bethesda are taking many, many years to make the next Elder Scrolls, and that won't be around for a long time. But Obsidian could sort of nick their biscuits, basically.
Drink their milkshake, nick their biscuits, land on their planet.
That's right. Yeah.
What is you said the Pillars of Eternity is a good world. What is its thing? Because it seems very traditional fantasy to me from screenshots, which is my only experience of Pillars of Eternity.
Yeah, that's really true. It's obviously like really chasing the kind of Forgotten Realms aesthetic, but it's much more interesting in terms of like there's kind of soul economy where souls are a kind of they're a kind of type of money really that get traded and experimented with, and that seems to be that's the most interesting part of the fiction really, is that you're sort of like trying to save souls but also spending them all the time to sort of make yourself more powerful, which is kind of like a cool, again, Dark Souls touches on this, but like it's an interesting take on that fiction where you don't just get more powerful for the sake of being powerful. Like there's a cost to it, like a human cost. And that's what kind of makes it interesting. Also, Deadfire is really, really good game, really underrated. That's the kind of pirate sequel to Pillars of Eternity. There's actually, I think it's better. It's a better RPG. It's just more interesting. There's more places to explore. You can be more different types of people in that game. but I think loads of people were put off by the fact it's a sequel to this enormous, heavy RPG. Um, but in truth, you don't have to play the first game to enjoy the second game at all. Like Deadfire is just really good in and of its own right.
Hmm.
So the idea of having like a sort of first-person RPG set in those worlds is actually really promising.
That sounds cool. The other game that was there that I liked the look of was Everwild, the new Rare game, taking their like Rare have almost completely rebranded themselves, I guess, from hey, we make cutesy Nintendo like stuff to through Sea of Thieves. Now we make sort of openish multiplayer experiences, and that looks like another one of those. But the trailer is sort of vague on details, but it seems to be about saving woodland animals with your pals using some sort of strange, vaguely pagan magic system. But I'm like totally guessing. Like it looks like Monster Hunter if instead of hunting the animals, you just kind of give them a nice cuddle.
It looks beautiful. It's sort of like cel shaded art style, but it's like really detailed and gorgeous. I loved the presentation of that.
Yeah, the promise of it is really good, especially if it does manage to avoid combat and somehow be an engaging mechanical experience about saving animals. I'm down for that. I don't know how they're going to pull that off, but I mean, if they do it well, I'd be very excited to play it. The exact other side of the spectrum to that is the Warhammer 40k Darktide, in which you're definitely not kind to any animals. Seems to be Vermintide, but in the 40k setting rather than in the fantasy setting.
Yeah, that seems to be the case, and I'm very excited by that because Fat Shark, like, they nailed the tone of the old world in Vermintide. Like, they really got it right. The kind of mix of human horror that universe kind of it's weird because I've been reading a lot of kind of 2000 AD recently, and for me, the 2000 AD and the Warhammer universes are kind of entwined in terms of tone. They both have this sense of like satire, but also like you're supposed to take it seriously as well at the same time. And I think that Vermintide does that very well, and I expect that tone to carry on into Darktide. And they've also picked a very good like way into the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Most of the time, you play a big space marine who's is an enormous power fantasy basically, but this time you're kind of mooks working for an inquisitor, and there's an enormous like Nurgle infestation in the deep depths of this hive city, and you're the underdogs basically, and you've been tasked to go in and clear this out. And no one cares if you survive or not, and that's for me spot on 40k. That is where 40k fiction should happen, and they've found a good kind of place to actually stage that game. I'm really excited about it.
Again, no gameplay evident.
Nope. Good point. Yeah, for sure.
Was there anything that had gameplay that we saw?
Psychonauts 2 had some.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, you know. Hellblade 2, I think, was that CGI? I think.
The Gunk had some, which is a game by Image and Form, the guys that do the SteamWorld games, like SteamWorld Heist and SteamWorld Quest and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Which are all really fabulous. And this is like a 3D third-person action game in which you seem to be exploring like an alien planet which has been ravaged by like an oil slick surface that you're clearing up as you explore around. It kind of looks colourful and fun, but kind of psychonautsy, I guess.
There's always Hello Neighbor 2, which is
oh yeah, in alpha right now. You can play.
Yeah, I think it's free to download as well on Steam at the moment. Weird game, that one, because it seemed to get popular off the back of streamers, if I remember correctly. The first game, like it was very much like a very popular Twitch game. And in the second one, the neighbor, you actually tried to rescue the neighbor, and instead you're being hunted by some sort of duck. And I don't know how to feel about that really.
It looks really interesting. It seems to have like, I'm not quite sure how open world it is. There is some space, basically some rural landscape, through which you're being hunted by this duck creature man thing. And it seems like you alternate between exploring this and being hunted by him, and then trying to break into his or their house. And it gives me quite "Sir, you're being hunted" vibes, actually, in some ways, because the rural landscape. And then within the building, there's a sort of alien isolationist sort of game of cat and mouse. I haven't played the alpha, but I have to say the trailer made the kind of bird-like movements of the duck creature make it very difficult to read because it's very abrupt, very quick. So I don't know how successful that will be, because being able to read and sort of duke around the alien in Alien Isolation is really what makes it work, I think.
Hello Neighbor is a weird case, because like you can look up on steamcharts.com how many concurrent users it's got on Steam and how many it's ever had on Steam, and it's a pretty small number because it's vastly more popular on mobile than it is on desktop. Like, it's got over 10 million downloads on Android because it's a free-to-play thing with in-app purchases. And, like, it took me a while to work this out, because everyone, like, they talk about Hello Neighbor as if it's, like, this hugely popular thing. But if you look at it on PC, it's like, oh, but no one seems to have played this, and no one who has played it seems to like it very much. But then they're getting like, it's being turned into an animated TV series and stuff like that. What the heck is going on? And it's because it's massive on mobile, essentially. So I would think that the sequel would be targeting that same audience. The other big one that was at the event, again, no gameplay, was Fable.
Oh yeah, yeah, excited for that. Don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, it's been in development for probably, 3 years now at least or something, by Playground Games, who are the makers of the aforementioned Forza Horizon. They set up a new studio in Leamington Spa specifically to make this. No idea what it is. Parochial British humour, cheeky. That's what the trailer seemed to suggest.
I thought it was quite on point in terms of what I remember Fable to be like, even though it was just like a very brief, like 30-second CGI trailer. Again, that game probably doesn't exist, but we'll see.
Is that all of the things you wish to talk about from the Xbox showcase?
Yeah, I think so from me.
Yeah, there was Tell Me Why from Don't Nod, but it's another kind of narrative adventure game from them, and they've done good ones. But like when you see a bad film trailer, that's kind of how all of their marketing comes out for me. So I don't know who these characters are or why I need to care about them. But they are good at making adventure games, so I will certainly play it when it comes out. That was mean. That was just really mean.
I tell you the thing I do like is that, so it's a character about two siblings exploring a mystery, and I think it's got flashbacks in it, but one of the characters is a trans man, and prior to its release, Don't Know it have put out like a page on the game's website where basically it's just like a page of content warnings, but the opposite of content warnings, because there is such a bad history of LGBT representation in video games and other media, where even when those characters are introduced, which is pretty rare in itself, they tend to befall terrible, terrible things. And so Don't Know have put out a page where they basically say, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Like, we're not going to do any of the crappy things. Basically, they've said in advance that basically these characters will have a happy ending. Without giving away too many details or spoilers or anything like that. But I just thought that was a nice, smart thing to do for a community which is obviously desperate for these kinds of stories to be told.
Yeah, that's right.
So the other bit of news this week, which we could discuss, is the hiring and leaving of Mike Laidlaw from Ubisoft Quebec. I think he was there for a year before going off. This is Mike Laidlaw, who was one of the lead creators behind Dragon Age. And apparently, while he was at Ubisoft Quebec, he was making a King Arthur themed game called Avalon, which was then ultimately cancelled on the instructions of the former chief creative officer. Are you sad about that?
I mean, I'm not like a big Dragon Age person, but Mike Laidlaw seems like a smart person and a good writer, and I would be well up for Ubisoft to continue their descent into RPG land. Like, you know, Assassin's Creed games have obviously become more RPG-like with the last 2 or 3 iterations, and so I was like, when they hired Mike Laidlaw, I was kind of interested to see them do more RPG stuff and less Assassin's Creedy old action adventure stuff. So from that perspective, I'm sad. I don't personally care about King Arthur as a bit of mythology.
See, I care a lot about King Arthur, but I don't really care about this particular game because I mean we know nothing about it. Maybe it was the correct decision to can it because if it was, you know, I'm not a huge Dragon Age fan by any means either. So if it turned out not to be a particularly challenging or interesting take on King Arthur, then why not have it binned off?
I've enjoyed. I really like Dragon Age, and I think it has like a good, fully sort of filled out fiction behind it. And like I want to see more stories set in that world. I think Mike Laidlaw is very much responsible for creating that. So it feels as though like he could do a King Arthur game justice. But it sounded like the way it's been reported, it sounded like it just got binned off on the whim of an executive, which is sad if that's true. But of course, we don't know what the actual circumstances are around that game's cancellation.
Yeah. Should we talk about what we've been playing this week? What have you been playing, Graham?
I've been playing Carrion. Or Carrion? I don't actually know how you pronounce it. Which is a game about a B-movie monster trying to escape from a research facility. And everything that's good about it is wrapped up in that monster, essentially. So if you've been following the developers on Twitter or just existing on Twitter within game spaces, I think you'll have seen GIFs of it over the last 2-3 years because it really does look incredible. The monster, to describe it a bit, is like a meaty, dripping, tenderly red mass, like someone poured some spaghetti over a meatball marinara sub. There is just something completely gross about it, and then it moves in the game in the most incredible way with using procedural animation. If you click in any direction within the world, tendrils from your body shoot out and cling to the walls and then seem to like drag you in the direction that you want to go, and because you're this kind of like meaty, viscous mass, you leave like a blood slick smear across every surface you touch. And your body sort of, as you move quickly, your body elongates into this kind of sausage, but then when you come together, the sausage kind of recongeals back into like a central mass. And it's really quite disgusting and delightful to watch, and because it just looks kind of like almost perfect, like the way that it kind of drags and shifts its weight around using physics and procedural animation. And it's also it's extremely liberating because it's a 2D game in which gravity is no obstacle. Like you can be in an elevator shaft, click upwards, and your hideous form will just reach out with its tendrils and very easily pull yourself upwards, and you can pick up a lot of momentum. But that's basically like that's the part of the game I really love, and then everything else stretches from mediocre to infuriating because it's a Metroidvania, and it's a very by the numbers Metroidvania, I would say. And like that's not, I quite like Metroidvanias, but I'm not like a massive fan of the genre or anything. And what it means in this instance is you start out with a basic set of powers, like you can chomp on people, you can do a little growl in order to locate nests in the environment, and then bit by bit you gain new powers that let you access new areas of the environment. Um, Normally, in order to flip a switch to open a door to move on through the game, and so you get powers, and the powers are all pretty cool, like parasitism, the ability to like sneak out one of your tendrils and grab a person and then control a human being and walk them around, and then you use them to press the button to open a door for you. Or you can turn into like a mass of, like a swarm of worms when you're underwater, which allow you to bypass certain grates so that you can, on the other side, press a button to open a door for you. And basically, every power you get, it's quite cool, but then you don't really feel like you're using it to any particular cool purposes. I feel like in the John Carpenter's The Thing, say, like if any time it or the alien from Alien wasn't on screen, he was actually just running around some service corridors, pressing switches, trying to get to the next area of the Nostromo or whatever. Like, that would be less frightening and less fun, and that's true here as well. You do also use those powers in combat, of course, but the combat also didn't work for me. Like, it's fine when it's easy. In fact, it's really fun when it's easy, when you're just like, you get quite early on, one of your first powers is like this bash move that like thrusts you forward at speed, and you can use that to slam down doors, and you can use it to slam down doors and then slam into any of the people on the other side, and they get tossed in the air, and you can grab them out of the air with one of your tentacles and drag them towards one of your many mouths and chomp them to bits. And by chomping them to bits, you grow in mass, and that lets you shift through different stages of like your size. Because although you unlock, 10 or more powers over the course of the game, like main powers, you only ever have at most really 3 accessible to you at any one time, and which 3 is determined by what size you are, and there are 3 different sizes. So you can go into like pinky water and do like a substantive fart in order to leave behind some of your mass in the pinky water, or you can go and chomp on people and you will grow in size and unlock those other powers. And so then that becomes part of the Metroidvania thing of, I need to use a power from my small size, I'm going to deposit some meat here, I'm going to do a thing, then I'm going to go back, pick up my meat, and go, using my larger powers, go do the thing. But in combat, you see, they're trivially easy because it's just like hapless scientists that are just running away from you. Or there are a couple of enemy types, like there's a security guy who has like a laser shield he holds in front of you. If you crash into that laser shield, it just starts destroying bits of your mass, so you get smaller essentially, because your size is also kind of your health bar. But it never created that sort of experience I wanted from the game, which is, again, that movie monster thing of like, if you're one of the regular humans hearing a noise coming from a ventilation shaft, and then something bursting out of that ventilation shaft and grabbing you and dragging you inside. There are lots of ventilation shafts in the game, lots of grates to burst from, but it was never necessary against any of the enemies to use those kind of stealth tactics or set traps or lure people in. The AI is quite stupid. They will put themselves in harm's way quite readily. And I'd almost always felt like I was just kind of cheesing it. Like it was always just hide around the corner until their alert state stops and they turn their back, and then try and move quickly enough that I can get the guy before he turns on his laser shield. And if I don't, and if I get there and he turns on his laser shield, I'm going to retreat, and I'm going to wait for him to turn off his laser shield and turn away again. And I just did that for most of the game. There were a few like harder enemy types that are like robots and people in mech suits and stuff, but those either chewed through me in seconds, setting me back to a checkpoint, so I had to repeat part of the game, or I would then just do it a second time, do the exact same thing, but this time I would just trivially tear it apart. And I never felt like there was any learning experience there between like, I understand what I did wrong now, I'm going to try something different, I'm going to try a different tactic. Like, there never felt like there was any tactic to the combat. And it's an action game, but I still wanted some sort of brainy meat to it to go alongside with the action meat. And then the real thing that I think crippled it for me is that it's trying to convey what you should do in any instance wordlessly. Like, it doesn't make sense for a big, gristly, dripping, oozing meat monster to have like a quest giver that you go talk to that tells you what to do or where to go next. And so there's very little words of any kind in the game. You never talk to another character or anything like that. Even when you're controlling a human, there's no real dialogue or anything, and there's no map. And this just meant that, given like it's the world is split up into discrete screens, some of which have like 4 or 5 entrances and exits. Most of the environments are kind of like grey metal military underground research facility type environments. It's incredibly easy to just end up going in circles, not knowing what you're even looking for, just knowing that maybe you haven't done something you're supposed to have done yet in order to unlock the next area. Maybe you have unlocked the next area and you just don't know where the entrance to the next area is, and there's nothing to tell you at that point. You just have to like keep shipping around at great speed through these different rooms, working out, okay, if I go that way, I double back on myself. What if I go back and on that third screen of the 5 screens I just looked through, what if on that third screen I try going down this way, until eventually, hopefully, you find, oh, there's this button here I haven't pressed. And sometimes it's a completely arbitrary thing. Sometimes it's like a little hole in the wall that you have to squeeze inside, that the art does not do a good enough job of communicating to you wordlessly that, hey, this is a thing that you need to pay attention to. Sometimes there are like these kind of I think they're flashback sequences where you're controlling a human being, and at one point opening the door to the next area requires you to just look at everything in that environment, and one of the things in the environment is just a thing on a wall. There's like 3 things on the floor and 1 thing on a wall, and you just have to go look at them, and that's what kind of like prompts the game to move forward. There's lots of instances as the monster as well, where the thing that opens the door is actually arbitrary. It's not actually connected to the door in any visible way. It's just, it's completely gamified in that way. And so like that just meant that I was never able to relax or really enjoy shipping around as the monster that much. I was just constantly anxiety about missing stuff, constantly getting lost, constantly feeling impatient, and combined with the fact that it's quite a by the numbers mediocre Metroidvania anyway. This is quite negative, isn't it? And it's just like a long monologue of negativity.
Well, yeah, I played it too, and I wish I could contrast with anything you said, but actually, we are of one mind, one meaty brain.
Does the game have a map?
No, there's no
No.
map.
Well,
No.
that's where that's gone wrong. I think
Yeah.
a Metroidvania just needs a map, and
Like,
the more hand-holdy it is, the better for me, honestly.
I can sort of see, because Hollow Knight, for example, was beloved, and it doesn't have a map at first. A map is an item that you have to actually craft by going through a certain chunk of the game. But it's also, that game is just designed in a way that it's much more navigable. Like, it's much easier to construct in your mind. And that's tied to every other design decision in the game. Like, just the movement speed in Carrion you're so quick. It's completely anathema to that movement speed to say, oh, actually, you should be drawing a map of this or trying to mentally map it when you're maybe only on a screen for like 4 seconds. Like, if you've already been there before, that's how long it's going to take you to get from one side to the other. So it's just, it's an odd choice for this particular game, I think.
I think it's odd that it's an action game, because like the first thing I thought of when I saw it, and spoilers for Inside, but the game Inside kind of at some point in the story creates a similar fantasy, and actually kind of like a roller coaster, and it's almost like kind of scripted for you, and it's not like a full action game in and of itself. It's just a kind of very strange twist of events.
I love that in Inside. Like, I love that game.
Yeah,
that's just incredible.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. I was wondering, like, if there's any comparison between the two. I guess not really. If it's like a Metroidvania action game where you're playing as a creature instead of just like suddenly becoming the creature, which is what's so good about Inside.
No, the closest comparison would be maybe Ape Out, which is similarly about a creature, in that case an ape, trying to escape from a bunch of scientists and guards basically that are keeping you trapped, and then that's an action game that you're just kind of like trying to beat your path out using the particular skills of an ape. But in that, there's no Metroidvania elements. It's just, no, there is a level. You're trying to get to the exit. If you start on the left-hand side of a level, the exit's going to be on the right-hand side. Even if it's a multiple floor level, you'll get to the right-hand side of one floor and you'll go down to the next level and you'll start on the right-hand side and you know you have to go to the left-hand side, therefore. And so, like, there's never any point of getting lost. Whereas as soon as there's all the switches and you can't get through that kind of door, you can't get through that kind of door, you can't get through that kind of door, you need to unlock these powers first. As soon as you add all that structure to it, I feel like you need a map more at the very least, or you need an art style which is really distinct and really communicative, which I don't think this has.
Yeah, I think that was my problem with trying to map it, in terms of memory, is that all of the different environments, and they are subtly differentiated when you go from one zone to another, they just look very similar. And because it's side on, it sort of it's not able to create realistic spaces for the kind of the purposes. So everything just looks like, a slice through an ant colony, basically. Not really, they don't have any kind of meaningful shape to any of these single screens. It's just like, here's a bunch of negative spaces that are interlinked, and some of them have people running around on them and have computers in them, but in no other way do they feel like an office space. It's not like you can kind of then identify them for any kind of use or theme which would allow you to then memorize where they are, or even be able to really remember why they're different from the room that they're adjoined to. And so, and the beginning of the game just bundles you through them so quickly, like room after room after room after room, and some of them have things in them which you only later unlock skills to access. But just, like Graham says, the speed of the movement is such that you've been through, I don't know, maybe 40 rooms by the time that the game slows down and unlocks something for you and says, oh, actually, you're going, I hope you're remembering all of that stuff you've just been through in 5 minutes. You're like, I really wasn't.
Yeah, there's also like it breaks its own continuity of space regularly as well. Like, I eventually worked out that there was a kind of hub area from which I could access, like there were like a hub, big atrial hub with spokes off it that I could go and access the different areas of the world. But it was 4 hours through the game before I realized that, and the game's only like 5 hours long, because up until that point, like, each section finishes by you opening a giant exit that you then breach through and appear somewhere completely different in the world. And so, like, I don't know where I am now in relation to where I just was, or in relation to anywhere else I have ever been. And you will come across a thing and you go, oh, there's a locked door there to a new area. I can see the new area on the other side. I have to get through there at some point. But then you'll go through one of those basically portals, come out somewhere else. And I'm like, well, how do I get back now to where I just was? It's just, yeah. I don't want to labour the point, and I already have. So kick the shit out of the monster. Yeah, it does, and the monster still looks really great in the game. In fact, the other thing I'll say though is that the thing about games, right, is you don't actually stare at the character you're controlling at all times. So, like, all that lovely procedural animation, after about 3 minutes, you stop noticing it because you're looking at the world around you. You're not looking at yourself. Like, just be looking at where you're trying to go. And so you stop noticing that all the tentacles perfectly grip to the walls and shift your weight in satisfying ways. It still feels liberating to move with that speed and without gravity as a problem. But yeah, you do stop noticing it pretty quick. What have you been playing, Tom?
Well, I've been playing the very new game Battlefront II, Star Wars Battlefront 2. And this was consumed by controversy over loot boxes when it was actually released. But it's actually quite a good dice shooter, actually. And like, now all the kind of loot box nonsense has been mostly removed from the game. It's a very, very good piece of fan service for Star Wars fans. just in terms of just the sound design. Dice games like have incredible sound. All the Battlefield games have incredible sound, and to see them turn their talents to Star Wars has been a delight. It's actually got like quite a fun single player campaign, as well as like still populated multiplayer servers. And I'd basically recommend it because it's on sale at the moment, I think, for about half price. And it's actually like, it's just, it doesn't suck. It kind of got, which is apparently as much praise as I could give any game at the moment. It doesn't suck, and especially if you like Star Wars, I think like as a piece of kind of like an aesthetic experience, you like, so imagine you went to Disney World and they put on the ultimate Star Wars experience for you, and it was all kind of like people dressed in costumes and stuff. Don't pay for that. Just play Battlefront 2. It's basically that kind of level of detail and attention to the design of the original films, right down to the precise reflectiveness of the stormtrooper helmets and stuff like that. That it gets absolutely right, and it's also it's brilliant at capturing how rubbish stormtroopers are at actually shooting people. So you get these laser blasters. They can't hit anything for shit. They just can't. So what ends up happening is that you have this sort of like, it's a dynamic situation where everyone's trying to shoot each other. No one could fucking hit each other. But you get this storm of blaster bullets that are kind of whizzing around your head, and that's Battlefront 2. It's not like a sensible shooter, or perhaps even a good one, but it recreates the Star Wars atmosphere brilliantly. I think it should be celebrated for that. And like occasionally you get to sort of like go to TIE Fighter as well. That's really nice.
I heard that it has giant insects in it. Can you confirm or deny that?
It has giant insects hilariously in the single player mode, where there's one mission where for some sort of mandated reason you have to be Luke Skywalker, and what he does in that level is beat up spiders. And it's just like,
there you go, perfect fan service. That's what all the fans want.
Right, absolutely. Not even a Rancor. At least give me a Rancor deal. Yeah, and that's bollocks. That's bollocks, isn't it? But
I really enjoyed that it inspired Andy Kelly to write an article about how he hates fighting giant insects in games, and he's obviously completely right. but for some reason, I don't know why I did this. I looked at the comments underneath his article.
Got blasted for that one. I don't know why.
It's amazing. But there was, my favourite of the criticisms was that somebody hates all these millennial editorials that are now popping up on PC Gamer. Just like the idea that fighting giant insects is a real millennial problem, or rather begrudging like these, boomers from Yorkshire going, in my day we used to fight insects and we bloody liked it.
Yes, we get some truly stupid comments on our website. That's the lesson I'll take from that. Yeah, I tweeted about this earlier. I don't understand at all. Like, someone tweeted at Andy saying that it was some sort of anti-Microsoft conspiracy that we disliked fighting giant insects. That'd be absolute rubbish. But anyway, yes, I agree with Andy. Giant insects are quite a lazy archetype for video game enemies.
I thought it was a bit mean about Half-Life Sandlines, though, which I think get a pass.
I do like those. Also, the fact you can control them like that.
Yeah,
that's a good turnaround. I really like having the pheromone, the sort of bomb thing.
Gives them real personality.
Yeah. And also, it's great when you go from the moment where you meet the lions, when you actually get to go into the prison level, which is actually and you actually start controlling the antlions in that arena and messing up combine soldiers. That's really fun. It's actually one of the worst levels in the game, but because of that one simple mechanic, I think it is rescued.
They're amazing in Half-Life Alyx as well, because you can blow their legs off individually, and if you shoot two of their legs off, their kind of big bulbous rear starts pulsating, and they leap up into the sky, and then you have an opportunity to basically shoot them and burst their bodies like a wet balloon. It feels great.
That sounds awesome. I don't really have much else to add about Battlefront 2. Just that, people just give it a chance.
Why did you go back to it?
Well, it was on sale on PSN, and I remember it always being beautiful on PC. But it's also absolutely hilarious. Like, it's very, very funny to just get fucked up by Yoda as a stormtrooper. Like, it's an absolutely ridiculous game in terms of the way it actually kind of handles the Star Wars heroes in that universe. And so you'll sort of like someone will earn enough sort of kill points or whatever, and they'll be able to become Darth Maul. And what you'll hear is like a kind of over the kind of video phone, you'll get, oh, Darth Maul is on the field. It's like, oh yeah, we're all fucked then. You'll sort of see him coming from a mile off. This little kind of like little glowing lightsabers on the horizon, and he's coming for you, and he's going to kill you. And it's so dumb. It's so dumb. I think Chris has talked about this before actually, because like Chris is much more well versed in like Star Wars lore than me, and has much more respect for it than I do. But but even though I have a very limited respect for the lore, I can even I can appreciate how little regard this game holds the lore. It does not care how stupid it is. And it's really good fun actually. But yes, it's stupid, but good, I think. But also maybe not good. Consult Chris Thurston; he'll know better.
But it's cheap, and that's the most important thing.
That's a very important part of it. Yeah, for sure.
What have you been playing, Marsh?
I've been playing Superhot Mind Control Delete, which I think began. Maybe you remember this better, but I think it began life as actual just DLC for Superhot. But it's since become a standalone game that is free to those who own the original game, but you can buy it separately or buy it as a bundle at a discounted rate. Anyway, the original Superhot was, if you're unaware, this supremely stylish, stripped down, short form shooter, which was built around this single brilliant gimmick, which is that time only moves when you do. And its shtick was to sort of drop you right in the middle of some frantic action movie scenario where, you know, the table's been flipped over at the casino and somebody's pulling a gun for your head and there's bullets whizzing through the air, or even, you know, you're in an alleyway and this van is just hurtling towards you. But because time only moves when you do, you have all the time you need to plot out your strategy for how you might escape this terrifying scenario. And in doing so, you end up piecing together these fluid, sort of superhuman series of feats where you vault over the roof of a car and duck under one of the whizzing bullets and smack the gun from the hand of one guy, catch it in midair and shoot another. And that's really cool. Mind Control Delete it's more of the same of this stylish combat sandbox, but instead of being this sort of linear preordained sequence of levels that set up really, you know, particular authored action scenarios, the game has been sort of retooled for repeat play. So instead you have this sort of, it's not really an overworld map, maybe it's an overworld map, I don't know, it sort of resembles an ASCII dungeon crawler level, and you sort of move between these nodes, and each node then boots up this randomized sequence of first-person encounters, and you're thrust into a level, and you have to kill a certain number of enemies before you move on to the next random level in that node sequence. And if you survive all the levels within that node sequence, you unlock extra paths in this overworld map. If you die, you immediately restart that sequence of levels within that node. And I've heard the words procedural generation being used about the game, and I think that's really misleading. I mean, technically there may be some element of procedural generation to it, but I mean, I think it's more that some elements of the levels are randomized. I think if you say procedural generation, people would think that the levels themselves are modular and can be reconfigured in a dramatic way, and that really just isn't the case. You are playing the same levels again and again and again, just in a randomized order in each node, and there are different sequences of enemies that spawn from different doors. Where you spawn is different in each time you play it, and as you progress through the game, and you have different powers at your disposal, and more levels unlock, and there's walls that start getting added to existing levels where there were previously none. But overall, the layout of the levels doesn't change, which is not at all criticism. The levels are persistently fun, and you don't need to change particularly, because As you explore this overworld, you unlock new abilities that alter the way that you engage with these combat encounters. Um, and these aren't things that you have just at your disposal all the time, but they build up a pool of upgrades that you can choose to activate during the course of a single node run. So you murder some dudes in the first level of node, and then it says you pick between bouncing bullets or increased melee speed and range, or you pick an upgrade that gives you the ability to immediately fire your gun again as whenever you score a kill, or gives you a temporary health boost for every kill. And these power ups are kind of cool and diverse, and they do make you alter your tactics to accommodate them. And I really like the fact that you aren't fully in control of what you have available to you, because it makes you choose between two in between different levels within a node. The exception to this, I'd say, is the major weakness of the game, which is that it actually classifies the most powerful upgrades separate to these and lets you choose which you use before each node. And these are much more dramatic power ups, like having an extra life for the duration of that node, or being able to leap huge distances, or exchange places with the enemy, or best of all, you have a magical katana which you can throw and recall to your hand like Thor's hammer.
Yeah,
It's fucking amazing.
that sounds great.
But the thing is, as soon as you get it, there's no reason to choose anything else,
Mm.
and it's so powerful. And it's powerful in a way which just removes part of the game, because otherwise one of the main tactical problems you have in the game is, how do I acquire weapons? Because the guns, if you pick up a gun, you use up its ammunition very, very quickly, and so you need to discard it, take another weapon from somebody else, or find one in the environment. And doing that is part of the major challenge of the game. But if you just constantly have a magic katana at your disposal, although there is a cooldown on how long you need to wait before you can recall it, it largely just removes that entire need to engage with the game's sort of threat. I mean, I like it because it makes me feel awesome and it makes the game kind of easy. But I do think it would be better if it was withheld, or you were forced to play with the other cores, the other major power ups without being given the option to choose.
My main memory of the original Superhot was desperately throwing a bottle at a man's head over and over again, that I've kind of snatched up from a chair nearby. And I guess it's sort of the idea of an infinitely respawning katana does kind of undermine that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah. The first game, it was much more about throwing things to disarm your enemies, then taking their weapons, whereas this increasingly becomes pretty instantly lethal. But it does do things to counteract that, where it throws new enemy types at you, some of whom have invulnerable body parts, or are largely invulnerable apart from one body part, or they have weapons that shatter when they die, or or when you shoot them, they explode in a hail of deadly shrapnel.
Cool.
And there's more of them, and they move faster, and eventually you have a chance of spawning bosses. I'm not quite sure exactly the mechanics which define when they can spawn, but they appear at least once during a sort of run at a single node, and they're really disappointing, honestly. Like none of them can be killed, which I think is probably yeah. But well, so I can see why they've done that. It's a really crude way to solve one of the game's other issues, which I'll come to later. But the main problems with them is that they just have these sort of cheaty ways of killing you. And one's this cool looking dog-headed man who sort of scampers around and then pounces at you from range. But he can just seemingly pounce through walls, which sort of
Good.
It just feels a bit like cheap to be killed by him. Like, oh well, guess I'm starting that and run again for no real good reason. And there's another one which has the same throw and recall katana power that you do. But again, his katana seems to clip through walls, so you just feel like, oh well, couldn't have done anything about that. And then there's another one which carries normal weapons, and he periodically just sort of uses his mind to teleport you into the place where he was and exchange places with you. But actually, that's of no obvious advantage to him. Like, there's no disadvantage to being moved elsewhere. Usually, it's usually a good thing. But I mean, the solution to all of them is move away. You just move away from them, which is welcome. But also, it's not really like a dramatic or varied way to deal with this kind of characterful boss threat. Like, non-engagement with them doesn't really offer any kind of sense of expression. And if you do get killed by a boss, like I say, it just usually, especially if one just spawns from a doorway that's really neat you, it just feels like a shitty reason to die. But the reason that being forced to move at all is welcome is because this is the other kind of sort of main problem with the game that emerges from its design in comparison to its predecessor. The predecessor didn't sort of had. I mean, these levels don't have intended solutions, and although the first game wasn't exactly prescriptive, there was usually some sort of suggested pseudo puzzle-ish strategy that it had been designed for, even if you had a lot of freedom within that. Whereas these are just combat sandboxes, really pure combat sandboxes, and as such, the best thing to do is just to go behind a corner, and it's just too easy to find a stretch of corridor between two corners and just pop out and nail people as they run up to your safe zone. And you can take out even the exploding dudes. You can just stab them and then duck back into cover again before their shrapnel hits you. And it's not like I'm not saying that's like a guaranteed cheese, but it's definitely like the path of least resistance. And so by having the bosses being unkillable, it does mean that they provide the service of chasing you out of those. But I mean, otherwise they just aren't very exciting in and of themselves.
I was thinking this as you were describing that. First of all, by the way, a shitty way to die should be the next James Bond tagline. Secondly, so for me, like the first game in particular was a enormous homage to action films, to Hard Boiled, and to like a lot of the scenarios, like the prison fight, basically scenarios that I've seen put into films. And that, to me, that was a lot of the value of Superhot, was that you get to feel like a badass actually playing through these scenarios that you've already seen on film. And it sounds like the new take on this sort of roguelike take on it isn't quite as satisfying in that way.
Yeah, I do agree. Like the way it's set up, the challenges in the first game was very, intendedly cinematic. Like they were all scenes, at least from an action movie that you recognize or echoes of. But I mean, even though the game doesn't do a good job of this game doesn't do the same job of setting up those combat encounters in the same cinematic way. Like the environments are still very kind of redolent of action movie scenes. Like there's one in a sort of casino disco sort of place, and then there's a helipad on top of an oil rig, and these kinds of places. You don't really, not all of them really exude personality. Because you're mostly looking for those corners for you to hide behind. Yeah, it does. I mean, it does do periodically this absolutely brilliant visual trick, which must be some sort of wild shader effect applied to the level geometry, and it makes the levels look like they exist as completely normal in a 5-foot radius around you. And then everything else just sort of telescopes in from infinity as you move towards it.
What?
Yeah, it's trippy as fuck. And it looks amazing. And it's the kind of effect that really only this medium can pull off. It doesn't work at all in a game about spatial positioning. Mostly because entities and collision detection are unaffected by this. So you'll shoot someone and your bullet will just hit a wall which hasn't telescoped into reality yet. And so that's just shite, honestly, which is sad. The other thing I want to mention is the story, such as it is.
I wanted to ask about this because the thing I remember about the first Superhot was it being that sort of obnoxious, radical sort of tone. Like a kind of early noughties in your face meta narrative thing that I find quite exhausting.
Oh yeah.
Does this do that as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I actually kind of admire the strict scoping of it, which is to say that, like, I don't know that you would. It's certain the game certainly wouldn't benefit from having a more explicit narrative attached to it. Like, it doesn't really want for any kind of story to frame it. So instead, they've gone for this glib meta framework to just fit around it, and it constantly reminds you through these sort of, these. It's constantly telling you that these sort of just one more go games are meaningless, and you're ultimately wasting your time, and it's a little bit, it's like, yeah, all right, yeah, but I mean, I think it could have worked. Like, it's really nicely for what it is, even though you might think it's a little bit twatty. It is really nicely, precisely executed. and like, I think the minimum of it disguises what a large amount of work actually it is to design an absence of story, just as it's just as much work to design for an absence of story as it is to design for a story. I speak from experience here, because it's not actually a million miles from the direction that I was trying to take Minecraft Dungeons, which was to have the game story be about not having any story, or rather having the player continuously thwart a narrator's attempts to tell a story. They abandoned this direction completely after I left. I'm sorry to say, but maybe they were very sensible to do so, because at least in Mind Control Delete's case, you're being told that you're wasting your time and this game offers only empty addiction ends up feeling hectoring and annoying, and also just kind of wrong, because, like, towards the end of the game, you're opening these sort of what are meant to be semi-corrupted text files that talk about, oh, I'm being mindlessly compelled to see all the content. Give me more content. I must see the end. And actually, like, by that point, I was just really searching for an excuse to stop playing. I don't really want more content. I just want the game to say, okay, it's okay to stop now. Yeah, like, I don't mean to sound mean about that. It wasn't that I hated the game by this point or anything. It's just I think that most games outstay their welcome, and actually, it's not addiction that keeps me going. It's just a sort of weird sense of politeness, because the game hasn't told me it's okay to stop yet. But actually, so I mean, the actual ending of Mind Control Delete is, I mean, it's sort of awful, but it's also kind of good in that regard, in that it forces you to stop playing the game, and you have to leave the game running for a period of time, but passive, in order to ever be able to play it again. And I think they reduced the amount of time this should take from something like 8 hours to maybe 1.5 or something in a patch.
God's sake!
But well, you say that, but also, like, it's probably right that you should have stopped by then. Like, this is quite a good service that a game that you can endlessly play just says, all right, mate, you've had enough. Walk away, get on with your life.
Yeah, but it should.
If you really, really want to play it again, you can, but, like, you shouldn't.
It should turn itself off rather than making you sort of walk around with some sort of promise of future content. That's like Death Stranding does this as well. It's terrible. I think it's just a game design crime, just to waste players' time for no reason, and for no sort of thematic. Like, I mean, it doesn't sound like you've really got anything extra from the story from that experience. It was just annoying.
Yeah, I mean, but also I'm not going to wait to play it again, because I'm not going to play it again. I think it judged the amount of Mind Control Delete that it is necessary for one human to imbibe, and that it effectively prevented me from ever imbibing more. I'm actually okay with that.
Yeah, fair enough. It seems to have gotten you at precisely the right point. But I imagine, like, a completionist, someone who really wants to actually kind of like rinse a game and get it all 100%ed, would be kind of screwed over by that type of ending.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is the exact sort of mindset that Mind Control Delete is meant to be sort of satirizing. I mean, annoyingly, facetiously, or whether you think that is a worthwhile satire to place as a burden upon the player, or not. I mean, that is what it's addressing.
Yeah, I think that's bollocks. To be honest, I think, like, completionist players just take their own type of pleasure from games. I'm not one of those players, but I don't see the worth in insulting that way of playing games. Let's say, if you want to 100% and totally complete a game, then go ahead and enjoy it the way you want to enjoy it. So I hate the idea of like a game lecturing me about that. I think that really sucks.
Well, you can't complete it really. I mean, it periodically flashes up messages on screen like there is no ending, there will be no closure, things like this. So, I mean,
That's not bad at all.
it is setting out its stall.
Right. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
Shall we do some questions from questions?
yeah. Why not? I think that sounds like a jolly good idea.
Lovely. What are the questions?
So our first question is from David, and he says, "Dear Cads and Crawdads, I set notorious Stuck in the Muck Marsh Davis as my ringtone for a couple of weeks. Being at home meant only my wife would hear it and roll her eyes at me. I changed it after it went off while working at a distance on a friend's porch. Thanks, Andy. Now, for a question. I'd be interested to hear how y'all relate to gore in games. While playing Doom 2016 a few years ago, it occurred to me how strange it was to revel in the red gushing of dismembered demons. Why do I enjoy this, I asked. So I tried to understand Doom's violence in artistic or formal terms. In other words, what is it about ripping the arm off an imp and using that arm to swat the imp's face that relates to the feel of gameplay and the overall science fantasy conceit? And how does it play off video games' short history as using colourful effects to tell the player they did something? Alex Wiltshire's article on the brutal Doom mod for the original Doom was helpful in this regard. I think that gore in games is more closely related to confetti and fireworks than it is to realistic violence. Superhot's polygonal shards are an intermediary example between high-res gore in Doom or Mortal Kombat and abstract particles in, say, Geometry Wars. So what's up with them gibs? Or jibs, if you prefer. Thanks for reading, everybody. David.
I think that's a really good point. But the gore that I like the most, or I miss the most, and this is going to make me sound like a terrifying lunatic, is it's not the exploding into a shower of jibs as you do in the Doom games, or as the enemies do in the Doom games. It's like the Soldier of Fortune gore, because there was something compelling about, say, playing a multiplayer game, shooting someone on the other side of a rooftop from great distance, and then going over to their body afterwards and being able to see specifically where you hit them. Like there is something about the being able to trace the cause and effect of bullets that gives those bullets greater significance within the game when they are like hit scan weapons, where I just sound like a terrifying lunatic, don't I?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, I'm going to try and walk this back now, because it would be just as good if it was paint. Like, I don't actually need it to be a terrible polygonal wound as it was in Soldier of Fortune 2. Like, it wasn't the gore of it that I was actually enjoying.
Destiny is a really good example of how to do like kind of pretend gore. So when you like headshots have bespoke animations in that game, and none of them involve blood. They involve often gas. So their head explodes and loads of gas goes out of the top, and that is very satisfying and is basically as good as gore, I think, in most games. Though having said that, I also love Sekiro, and Sekiro is incredibly bloody. But that's part of the kind of the sort of samurai film lineage. I think like the sprays of blood are actually part of that kind of filmic heritage that it has to realize as part of that genre.
It's also not in any way realistic. Like, I mean, we talk about gore, but gore in reality is nothing like gore in horror films or in video games where there's just huge splashes of gelatinous blood. Like, somebody gets shot in real life, a tiny hole opens in them and they fall down. And it's kind of, in fact, it's way more disturbing to see real violence because there is a sort of instantly recognizable minimalism to it. There's just something about a way that a person falls when you know that they're now unconscious in a way which just doesn't happen in horror films where somebody's gargling, and screaming and there's blood spraying everywhere.
Yeah, I watch a lot of UFC, which is I really enjoy the sport, but that is like when things go badly for one particular fighter, it is just pure violence. And you're absolutely right. There's something quite understated about it when something really bad happens to someone. They are very good at not showing pain ever. So if someone gets kneed in the face and it shatters the forehead, they look disconcerted, and that's about, and then they fall over, and that's the extent of it. And that's kind of, yeah, you're right. It's like there's something very showy and overstated about the way most game violence is depicted, and often it's like often I think a lot of it is about like communicating to the player that you've actually hit someone. So a big spray of blood, or a big kind of like the Call of Duty kind of cheats a little bit by having this little cross appear in your crosshairs, this little red cross when you've actually hit someone. I think like it's a combination of the sort of gore fantasy and actually communicating to the player that you've actually done a good shoot at someone.
Kolos writes, "Hi. I just listened to episode 332, Nutted to Death by Guy Fieri's Helicopter, and I heard about how Tom Senior has begun his chess journey. I'm a long-time listener. I've been listening since the PCG UK days, and about 10 years ago, I was really into chess. I know there's a lot of resources to learn chess from now, but I think that one of the best I ever encountered is Chessmaster 11, I guess, XI, maybe, Grandmaster Edition. The tutorial is voiced by Josh Waitzkin, if that means anything to you. It doesn't mean anything to me, I'm afraid. It is extremely informative and fun, especially the TAL segments. They're really epic games. This is just like a language I'm not familiar. This is like Chris talking about Destiny. If you want to just play, there's a ton of personalities at every ELO to play against, each with its own quirks and playstyles, which I believe mimic people very closely. It's kind of hard to get a copy, but if you can find one, I think you'll greatly enjoy it. Do you have any idea what that's about, Tom?
I understood about 40% of that, and but I'm very grateful for the recommendation because I'm still exploring chess resources. I've recently started watching Chess24 on Twitch, and there's currently a live tournament happening over the next couple of weeks, and we've got like Magnus Carlsen, who's on a cruise ship somewhere playing chess with with a man who has received a contractual dispensation to be allowed to watch cricket or play Hearthstone on his second screen as he plays professional chess.
What?
Yeah, it's a strange world, and actually, like, it's very fun to watch the commentators who are all grandmasters, but they're absolute nerds. They're absolute like sort of telly nerds, and they're just talking about like episodes 24 as they're also sort of like gaming out possible, the way that this professional game might play out in the next sort of 20 turns. So yeah, I've been greatly enjoying that, and I'd like to also say thank you to the person who recommended that I play Go, and as I responded to him to say that I have played Go all my life, and it's an amazing game, and possibly the more fulfilling game to learn than chess, because chess is so complex and there's so much theory, whereas Go is much more accessible. And the rules are much simpler, and it's a brilliant game that everyone should try.
I don't think I've ever played it.
I will teach you.
Awesome. All right.
It's very good. It's really good.
That'll be the post-COVID treat.
Yeah, absolutely.
He also says, by the way, I got into ale a few years ago because I studied in London, and before going there, I asked you guys if there was anything I should try in the UK, and you said ale. Great suggestion.
Well done, us.
He also asked a question, how much do you value portability? I'm always torn between playing a game on my PC at 120 Hz and a great screen, or playing them on the go on my Switch at a much higher price and a mediocre 30 Hz screen. Cheers, Carlos.
I own a Switch, and I take it with me on the rare occasions where I travel anywhere, and then I do not play it at all. It just sits at the bottom of my bag. Sometimes when I'm at home, I open up the Switch and I go to the Nintendo eShop and I buy some new games, and then I set them downloading, close the Switch, never play them. I also own several Game Boys, Vita, which I've never played. And I've currently got the page open for the Analog Pocket, which Analog are a company which make really fancy looking retro consoles, and the Pocket is their kind of hardware emulation of a Game Boy Advance, and it looks lovely, and it's $300. and if I bought this and I'm thinking about it, I would never play it. I would just never play it. I know I would never play it, but it looks so nice. I like the aesthetics of portability in hardware, but no, apparently it's not a thing I need in my life.
I used to have a notebook which could run almost nothing, but it could do Spelunky. And to me, that's like my favorite portable experience. I've got a Switch as well, and I play that a lot as I'm traveling around, and it's a brilliant thing. But Spelunky on a very cheap notebook is a very good time.
I have a question for you guys.
Oh,
Or rather, I'm going to steal a question from TJ House, who actually asked it in the Stuck in the Muck subsection of the Creating Crowbar Discord. But it was a really good question. I started typing out an answer. I was like, no, I shall ask it of my fellow podders. So his question was, where do people stand on modifying graphical settings to increase like the chances of successful man shoots? He was talking specifically about Hunt Showdown, but I think this is generally applicable. Like, do you reduce quality to reduce clutter to get more frames per second, or are you the kind of people who just crank it into exceedingly pretty and leave it there? Do you feel like it's cheating? Is my addendum to the question. To where is the threshold for you between performance enhancement and actual cheating?
That's a good question, actually.
yeah.
Like, I don't consider it cheating. Like, if you can do it, certainly if you can do it from the options menu of the game, then it's fair. And I don't do any particular tweaks. Like, in most instances, I am not good enough at a multiplayer game to get real further gains from that kind of tweakery. You know, like I've played a few rounds of Hunt Showdown. Not like the graphical settings are not the stumbling block I'm experiencing when I'm dying in that game over and over again. I have done it in the past, though, particularly with Quake 3, where I got really into Quake 3, played it a lot, particularly one-on-one against friends. And if you would just tone down some of the graphical settings, then the player models would pop out better against the backgrounds and stuff like that, particularly at distance. And so I did that. And I think at the time I followed like a guide from a Quake 3 Pro or something, which involved not just doing it via the menu settings, but like actually editing config files in order to change settings that way. At that point, start to get slightly uneasy about it, because once you're editing a text file that's bundled with it, technically those options are exposed to the player, but it starts to feel a little bit less intended by the designers that you edit those things. But I did do it, and I don't regret having done it, and it was beneficial. So yeah.
Tom?
I'm a cranker, Marsh. I crank to the max, and I don't stop. No matter what the frame rate does. I derive no pleasure from being good at the game. Only that the game going into my eyeballs is of the highest quality visually. That's what I would say. I've actually done this before for racing games, like really old ones, where I've turned all the graphics down just to get that kind of 60 frames per second, but also just because I'm bad at seeing the corners, which is really bad for a racing game. You need to be able to see the corners. But I found it easier, almost at low resolutions with less geometry, to actually kind of like pass the track. But that's the only time I've ever done it. And I remain bad at racing games even today.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I feel like the question, not specifically TJ's question, but just the question of where this threshold is in general between cheating and performance enhancement assumes like there is any kind of platonic level playing field that it's possible to achieve with different people's setups and different people's abilities. And like Hunt is really interesting for this, because there's loads of different parts to it. But for one thing, I actually found it was easier to perceive movement at a lower frame rate. because it's it's just more abrupt, and so your eyes pick it up more easily. So actually having a higher graphical setting may help to reduce the frame rate and thus make people more visible. I don't know. It's not scientific. But the other thing is, my setup is shit, and it really does make a big difference to the extent that people who are spectating me can see a lot more than I can on my monitor. Like, to the extent that my hardware is not rendering somebody on the other side of a fence, and not only can somebody who's watching me see through a hole in the fence, but they can see the person on the other side of it very clearly. And so, like, I feel like, given that, shouldn't I be allowed to have some other kind of compensation? Like, even at the resolution I play, the smoke effects are completely different, so that they're more or less opaque to me, and they're not opaque to people who are playing at higher resolutions. So I don't feel too bad about if were there any ways that I could affect the settings. There are things you can do using NVIDIA's overlays. Like NVIDIA's overlays are on the borderline of what feels cheaty to me, because they so completely, like, you can have an overlay which just it sort of like emphasizes all the edges of everything, and on levels in Hunt Showdown which are foggy, having this filter turned on really helps things pop out from that fog. And I don't really feel that's cool, but at the same time, my monitor is so bad that it renders night levels basically unplayable. So maybe maybe it's okay to add a filter which really cranks up the brightness.
I was about to say that gamma and brightness are the two secret weapons that I've needed to actually make myself better at games. When Chris and I did our Bloodborne playthrough, I couldn't see a fucking thing in that game. I'm amazed I killed anything. But once we actually bumped up the gamma and actually I could see the crows, evil crows, it became a lot easier. And I found that, like, for almost all games, that's true. I don't know why games sort of like just on my television as well as my monitor just always seem too dark.
It's that thing where they get the two icons and they say, move this slider until the icon on the left is invisible. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
That icon on the left is going to be bright and clear, and I'm going to enjoy the game.
It's like, yeah, stop feeding me this bullshit. I know how this goes, for sure.
So I always feel bad about that. So I don't make it invisible. I will admit to that, but I always make it mostly invisible. Like, I'm not as comfortable with it just being completely bright on that left-hand side one that should be invisible. A strange negotiation with, like, a developer who can't see me and doesn't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But also, that developer is wrong.
Fundamentally, yeah. There's art directors who are shaking their heads right now. deep disappointment.
I'm joking, of course. They're wrong, though.
Well, those are all the questions we had. Tom, I think you had an announcement to make.
Yes. So keep an eye on your podcast feeds, because hopefully all things go well. You'll see a kind of film and telly podcast dropping into your Crate and Crowbar feed. This is like a total freebie. We're not charging patrons for it at all. It's just a kind of little experiment. And I'll be joined by Jamie Britton, who co-created Skins, which is a brilliant coming-of-age comedy drama. And yeah, he has very good taste in telly. And so in the first episode, we're going to talk about a very strange show called The Shivering Truth and the brilliant devs. So yeah, give it a download, give us a listen. I can't wait to do it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
So yes, if you'd like to send us another question, you can do so at questions@crateandcrowbar.com, or you can tweet us at Crate and Crowbar. All these recordings are uploaded as videos to YouTube, where you can find other stuff by us. The address for that is youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Thanks as always to our backers on Patreon. You can back us too at patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. You can simply join our lovely Discord community, the link for which is on our website, which is crateandcrowbar.com. We're all off to drink milkshakes on our Biscuit planet. I've been Marsh David.
I've been Tom Senior.
And I've been Graham Smith.
Fairly well.
Thanks for listening, everybody.